we're going over to Sarah. We'll just transition.
Okay, let's zoom in further from the macro down to the micro, which is our 90 acres in that countryside. So here's a rather dynamic bunch of Swiss chard, and I'm going to start talking about our farm. So this is an aerial view of our 18 plots. They're all 50 by 100 feet, and you'll see that they're not one giant field, kind of like our neighbors to the east, but they're nestled in some pretty complex habitat of trees, and there's a wetland. We have a creek running through our property, and various kinds of woodlots. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later and how it kind of helps my growing practices as an ecological farmer. So what's our next? That's the same photo that Deb was using earlier, but I like this one because it shows a little bit more of our crop diversity and supports, and the kind of the topography of the land. So it's quite hilly on Mount Wolfe, really is on the south slope of a mountain that you get in southern Ontario. And we run something called a community supported agriculture program. So this is a business model that was actually pioneered in Japan. I believe it was in the 80s, as a way that consumers would approach farmers, and they wanted to know with assurance that their food was grown safely in the face of chemical contamination, etc. And it's since grown to encompass things like equitable and ethical employment and living wages and treatment of animals and growing practices. So the CSA program, as a bare bones explanation, makes capital available for the farmer to pay for wages, seeds, equipment, and other start of season costs that we face as farmers of our small scale. You know, we can't take out loans from big banks the way that large cash croppers can. And in exchange, our CSA members, so those are our customers, receive fresh produce bi-weekly or weekly, depending on how much they eat. And one of the great byproducts is that we build community and relationships between growers and eaters, and this results in different kinds of capital, social capital, feelings of, you know, knowing who your neighbors are, even if you just see them once a week, to say, hey, how's it going? You know, like that, I can't stress enough the value that that has on a social level. And well, we got a freezer today because we kind of did a call out to say, hey, does anyone ever used freezer? We don't want to buy a new one. And sure enough, one of our members was like, yeah, I was actually just getting rid of it. So perfect. There you go. There's one less new appliance that has to be consumed. So these are all just descriptions of the connections that can be made when you just think of your community a little bit differently, I suppose. And we also do a farmer's market in the city. Pre-COVID, we were doing one in Bolton as well, but that's been put on hiatus. And that provides an outlet for our surplus produce at a premium market prices, which is nice, and access to a wider community. And it feeds into, you know, that local economy and agritourism thing where people are spending their time and money in their community as opposed to elsewhere. And we also have an online farmers market, and that was a response to COVID-19. And it's been interesting, definitely different sets of labor and logistics, but it's great because it diversifies how people can access our farm and our products. So in addition to the veggies that we grow, we also bring in a suite of products from local producers, and this was really stemming from our ambition to contribute more to a strong local food system, a recognition that people's grocery dollar doesn't go entirely towards vegetables. They also need to buy other foods. Man cannot live on vegetables alone. So more of that grocery dollar is able to go towards local producers who are in the countryside. We've identified these specific producers as sharing our values of ecological stewardship and usually community engagement, etc. so that our CSA members' money is also supporting them and creating this pull through the supply chain for products that meet a certain threshold of ecological sustainability. And we actually capture approximately 30% of an average family's food needs through our CSA program and what we bring in. And eaters have access to regional foodstuffs, and the community retains a vital knowledge base and capacity for food production and ecological land management. So something that I think is has been a luxury up until this point, which is buying local food. It's like, well, we need to retain the knowledge and the capacity to produce that food if it's not a luxury anymore, because supply chains have been disrupted from other nations in our globalized economy, which, are we seeing that? Yes, we are. We don't want to be left holding the bag when those structures collapse or are interrupted and we don't have the ability to feed ourselves. I just wanted to talk about our growing practices a little bit and the ecological context therein. So I'm a soil nerd, self-confessed. Love my mycorrhizal fungi, and the concept that you don't actually have to feed the plant. If you can take care of the soil, like, the plant's going to just kind of take care of itself. So I urge you all, if you're even a little bit interested, to start YouTubing or doing some reading on the soil food web and the amazing ecosystems that exist in the few inches of soil that hug our planet. And these are the fundamental processes that turn the stuff Earth is made of, the minerals and elements, into what we as organisms can access, and they're made bioavailable through these complex relationships through bacteria, fungus, arthropods, and all the way up to mammals, the voles. They're little cultivators. They till stuff and bring up subsoil nutrients. Sorry, I'm gonna stop talking about soil now, but it's really, really interesting. So my growing practices are non-certified organic. I learned on and worked on a certified organic farm for 3 years before we started Mount Wolfe Farm. So I'm, steeped in those principles as just a default, really. I should reiterate, I'm also a first-generation farmer. So I came to farming pretty fresh, actually more from a context of gardening and being just passionate about plants and the ecological systems that support them, and us. So our soil management is low till or no till if I can, avoid disturbing that soil strata and the life therein, because how would you like it if someone took your house every 6 months and just shook it and then and then expects you to get your paperwork done? I can't find anything, and sorry. We do intensive crop rotation. We grow like 30 different kinds of things. Maybe within that, that's about 5 or 6 plant families, and you don't want to be growing the same thing year after year in the same place, because you could be exposing it to pathogens from the previous year. So you should see my spreadsheets. It's a pretty intricate plan of what's going where year after year. And we apply compost. It's important to have a good amount of nutrition for annual vegetable production. It's pretty intensive, but if you just apply the elements, the NPK that plants need, you're not actually feeding the soil health, you're just feeding the plant in a very short-term way. And in the long term, that's not gonna do much for your overall soil health. If you're just treating it like a growing substrate, it's not. Anyway, I'm gonna keep going back to soil if I'm not careful here. So our seed sourcing, I primarily buy our seeds from William Dam. They're down in Hamilton. So those varieties ought to have adaptations to our region and the weather, although it's very variant these days. So I can't blame the seeds if they don't know what's coming down the pipe weather-wise in our summers. Insect pest management is a big one, especially for organic production. We use a lot of physical barriers, and that looks like insect netting over all the brassica crops. like cabbages and turnips, etc., because there's a very tiny beetle that will defoliate your plants in the springtime, and the only way to prevent them from getting to your plants is literally covering it. So it's really labor intensive, which is often why organic vegetables are more expensive if you're trying to pay a living wage. So we've had to kind of make some valid, okay, I got my 5 minutes here. I just want to quickly talk about the trade-offs that I make as a farmer with the use of plastics, and it's something that I'm still kind of grappling with. We use a lot of, as I said, physical barriers for pests, but also large sheets of bale tarp for weed suppression and for this low and no-till. And it's been difficult to kind of have that. It's at odds with all the messaging we're getting around plastic consumption, but in terms of the labor needs for producing vegetables, even at a small scale consistently, it's what we've chosen to do. So, you know, the jury's still out on how that's going to look in 15 or 20 years if we have supply chain disruption for those materials. They do last several years, but still they rely on the plastics industry going strong. So there's very few things that are black and white in this world. It's something that I'm learning more as I get older. And let's talk about more broad strokes. This slide is great. It just looks at how what advantages you can have in your farming operation if you are prioritizing agrobiodiversity. So it's not just, ooh, that's nice that we have trees over there. They have a function in our operation. And if you're interested in exploring more work on what's being done to account for the natural capital of certain green infrastructure, which is a great term, that's often what I find is a great point of entry to talk to people about preserving and creating more green space, is the asset that it can provide to humans, even though, you know, it'd be nice to just say it has intrinsic value for its own sake, but it's hard to reach people there sometimes. Instead, you could be like, flood protection. If you just left those trees there, you know, your house would be at less risk the next time your river floods. Or we have issues around pollinators. Maybe don't spray everything with Roundup, and we'll and we'll have habitat for migrating pollinators. So it's a good slide there. What am I doing next? So I just want to talk a little bit about human resources. And we do run our business as a family, so I certainly couldn't do it without my aunts and other members of our team. A lot of young farmers that I know are trying to do everything as just a couple. And I can't stress enough how diverse the skill set to work at this scale of agriculture needs to be. I thought that I could kind of get away with just really liking plants and knowing about botany, but I also have to have basic business knowledge. You need to be really good with human resources because you're relying on people. So if your people skills are crap, you're gonna fall down on that pretty quickly. So that often looks like everyone kind of playing to their strengths and being in a lot of communication and just keeping an even keel of respect, and that we're all have a stake in our farm and our business. It's so much more than just income and a business. You know, I think that farming is a really great opportunity to live the complexity paradigm as your life. So I think that that's almost my last slide. Yes. Social impact, going back to what Jim and Debbie were speaking about, a lot of place-based identity, I think is super important to emphasize, because if we don't have caring about the landscape as part of our personal story, people aren't going to give a damn about what happens to it. And that picture on the left is me and my grandmother, and we're looking at lamb's quarters, which is a very edible and very tenacious weed. And you know, that's kind of where it all started for me, was just being allowed and being encouraged to explore the wonders that are all around us. Like, it's amazing, and we should lead more children out into the fields and the forests, and maybe this problem will solve itself. in the next generation. So that's a little note about Arias as a institute, and I'll pass it back to Jim.
Yeah, just finally, this is just a note really to say, so as part of the vision, the original vision for Mount Wolfe Farm, there was also attached an institute for learning and for developing good practice and for attracting research and to inform policy development around many of the things that we've been talking about today. And Arias, the Oak Ridges Institute for Applied Sustainability, is now up and running. We have been doing some local food and farming workshops. Well, we were going to do some workshops, but then COVID came along. But we have a master student working for us at the moment in terms of that. And also we're looking at, we've applied to do some climate change workshops from the town of Caledon as well. So that will be going forward. We'll be doing more work on the kind of research and policy side of things in the Greenbelt in the future. And you can go to arias.network.org. Sarah and I are both associates, and Debbie is the director of Arias. You can go to Arias Network and see a little bit more about that. But that is now us. So I'm going to hand you back now to Nicole, and yeah, we'll be able to take any questions on what we've done, what we said. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.